You've done everything they asked, smiled when you were tired, nodded when you disagreed, shrunk your voice just enough to still be liked. You've spent your whole life being easy to be around, and yet you feel heavy, don't you? Not broken, just lost. As if there's someone still trapped beneath the version of you the world applauds. Someone louder, wilder, clearer. Someone you used to know before you learned it was safer to dim. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "Become who you are." But no one talks about how lonely that road feels at first. Because the moment you begin to walk away from the person you were trained to be, the silence can feel unbearable. You start asking, if I stop pleasing them, will they still love me? If I say what I really think, will they still stay? If I finally stop pretending, who will I be? This isn't just identity, it's survival. Because somewhere early on, you realized that being fully yourself came with consequences. Maybe it was a parent who called your curiosity too much, a teacher who only praised you when you followed the rules, a friend who ghosted you when you got honest, a partner who mistook your emotional honesty for drama. And over time, you made micro adjustments, small silences that added up to a different self. Not fake, just filtered. Until one day, you couldn't tell if people loved you or just the version of you they never felt threatened by. That confusion isn't your fault. Nietzsche saw it long before us, how society rewards sameness and punishes originality, how the human need to belong often overrides the deeper need to be whole. But here's the part most people miss. The pain you feel now, that quiet ache in your chest that shows up when you're alone, that's not weakness. That's the call to begin again. The call to unbecome what you were told and to return to what you were before the world taught you to edit. And it won't happen in a single moment of rebellion. It begins, slowly, by listening, really listening to the voice you silenced to be accepted. That voice that still wants to speak, even if it shakes. The one that doesn't care if it makes sense to anyone else. The one that says, I don't want to be safe. I want to be real. Tonight, let that voice speak. Not all at once, not in a scream. Just a whisper, barely loud enough to notice, but enough to begin. Because the journey Nietzsche spoke of to become who you are doesn't start with certainty. It starts with permission. Quiet, gentle permission to stop performing and start remembering. You probably don't remember the exact moment, not like a scene in a movie. It wasn't one single event. It was quiet, gradual. The way a room dims as the sun sets so slowly, you don't realize it's dark until you notice you can't see yourself clearly anymore. That's how it begins. You're young, maybe 5, maybe 10. You laugh a little too loud, speak a little too fast, feel everything a little too intensely. And then someone, with or without cruelty, teaches you that your light is inconvenient. You talk too much. Why are you so sensitive? You're being dramatic. Just be normal. Simple words, said offhand. But they become bricks, and without even knowing, you start building walls. You filter your joy. You quiet your instincts. You become good at reading rooms before you read yourself. And here's the cruel irony. You get praised for it. She's so mature. He's so easy. They're so polite. But what they're really saying is, you've become easy to manage. And in a world that celebrates conformity and calls it safety, you learn that being fully yourself is risky. Nietzsche called this the beginning of forgetting, not the loss of memory, the loss of self. Because when you shrink often enough, you start believing that your smallness is who you are, and that bigness, aliveness, honesty, intensity is dangerous. So you seek approval instead of alignment. You measure your words. You shape your tone. You laugh at jokes that don't land and say, "It's fine," when it isn't. And every time you do, part of you whispers, "This isn't me." But the world claps. So you keep going. You build a personality that fits the room, forgetting that you were once a whole landscape. And here's the painful truth. Most people never stop. They live full lives as edited versions of themselves, chasing relationships, careers, and roles that fit the mask but never touch the soul. But not you. You're here, awake enough to notice, quiet enough to hear the voice beneath the noise. That voice that says, "What if I don't want to be manageable? What if I don't want to dim just to belong? What if my truth is louder than their comfort?" That's not rebellion, that's remembrance. And yes, there's grief in that. Because when you start to return to your real self, you realize how long you've been away, how many times you said yes when you meant no, how often you laughed to hide the ache. But grief is not weakness. It's proof that you're feeling again honestly, fully, and that feeling is the beginning of truth. Nietzsche believed that every step toward becoming who you are will feel like a betrayal to who you were taught to be. That's the price of coming home. And that's where we are now. Not fixing, not fighting, just standing still for once and listening. It happens without warning. You speak a little more honestly. Say no without apologizing. Let your face stay serious when something doesn't feel right, instead of forcing the usual smile. And then you notice it. A shift in the room, a pause in their eyes, an unfamiliar silence. The version of you they were used to, the softener, the peacekeeper, the one who knew how to edit their truth just enough to keep the mood comfortable, is gone, or at least slipping away. And the people who love that version don't know what to do with this one. You weren't rude. You weren't cruel. You were just yourself, unfiltered, clear, calm. And that, somehow, is the thing that feels threatening. Because the moment you stop playing the version of you that made others comfortable, they are faced with something they didn't sign up for, your truth. And here's where it hurts, not because they get angry, but because they grow distant. They pull back in small, quiet ways, fewer messages, less warmth, confused glances, passive little comments like, "You've changed." And they're right, you have. But not in the way they think. You're not becoming someone else. You're becoming yourself. The self you put on hold to keep peace, the self you locked away to avoid being too much. And now that self is returning, not as rebellion, not to prove a point, just to breathe. Nietzsche once wrote that every act of becoming is also an act of separation. That growth does not come with applause, it comes with friction. Because when you change, you reveal who was only there for the role you played. And that truth is brutal. You start to realize that love, attention, even friendship sometimes existed only so long as you fit their comfort zone. And now that you don't, they vanish. Not dramatically, but subtly, as if your authenticity turned down the volume of their interest. And that, too, hurts, because you thought becoming real would bring you closer to people. But at first, it makes things quieter and lonely. But here's what Nietzsche knew, and what you are now starting to feel. When you begin to be truly yourself, the world doesn't get louder, it gets clearer. The noise fades, the masks drop, and only what is true remains. That clarity is not a punishment, it's a gift. Because you are no longer investing your heart in places that only love the version of you who performed. You are finally saving your energy for what sees you fully, wildly, deeply. Yes, some people leave when the role disappears, but better that than living your whole life for a script that was never yours. Tonight, let yourself grieve the roles that kept you loved, but also quietly celebrate the one who no longer needs them to feel worthy. At first, the quiet felt unbearable. You'd spent so long filling your life with noise, approval, praise, constant movement, that when you finally stepped back, all that was left was stillness. No echo, no applause, just you. But slowly, almost without noticing, the silence begins to shift. What once felt hollow now starts to feel clean, spacious, not lonely, but peaceful. It's as if something inside you is finally exhaling after holding its breath for years. You no longer need constant reassurance because you've stopped outsourcing your sense of self. You're not checking every mirror you pass. You're not calculating your words to be palatable. You say what you mean kindly, clearly, and let others choose how to receive it. And if they don't like it, that's no longer a crisis. That's information. Nietzsche believed that freedom wasn't found in chaos, but in alignment with one's own will, the will to be, to express, to stand without bending. And now you feel it. A sturdiness that doesn't need to be seen to exist. It's strange, even disorienting. You still catch yourself wondering, should I go back to the old way? Should I soften again? Smile more? Keep the peace? Just to keep people close? But then you remember what that cost you. Your sleep, your breath, your peace of mind. And suddenly, staying true feels less like a risk and more like a return, a remembering. You start to rebuild your routines, not around productivity, but around presence. You're drawn less to loud rooms and more to quiet moments, a cup of tea, a walk with no destination, a book that doesn't try to fix you. You start noticing beauty in places you used to rush past, the way sunlight touches your floor, the sound your voice makes when it's not trying to please, the way your body settles when no one's watching, and perhaps most surprisingly, you start to enjoy your own company, not as a distraction, but as a choice. Nietzsche said, "He who cannot be alone will only know solitude in a crowd." You now understand that. You've met the version of yourself who no longer needs to be filled, who is no longer reaching out in every direction, desperate to be seen, because you're finally seeing yourself. And in that gaze, there's no performance, no perfection, just truth and wholeness, and maybe even softness. Not weakness, but the kind of softness that only comes from someone who's done breaking themselves into pieces for others to love. The kind that no longer needs noise to feel alive. The kind that breathes deeply in the silence because it finally feels like home. It doesn't feel like a victory. There's no celebration. No one claps. No one calls to say they're proud of you. And yet, for the first time, you don't need them to. You wake up and realize you've stopped waiting. Waiting for someone to validate your truth. Waiting for permission to speak. Waiting to feel enough. The hunger is gone, not because you're full of other people's approval, but because you've finally remembered how to feed yourself. Nietzsche said, "At the moment of your highest joy, do you not hear the voice of your child? And now you do. That voice, young, bright, unafraid, has returned, not in volume, but in presence. It no longer whispers through shame, it speaks through calm, and it says, "This is me, I'm here, I never left." All those years you thought you lost yourself, you didn't. You only stopped listening. You only traded your truth for safety over and over until the echoes became faint. But now, the noise is gone, and in its absence, your real self is no longer a stranger. You walk differently, not taller, not louder, just more present. You say less, but you mean more. You attract not attention, but resonance. Not everyone understands you, but that's no longer the metric. You're no longer addicted to being liked. You're interested in being real. And that shift, though quiet, changes everything. You build slower now friendships, habits, inner dialogue. You don't rush toward connection. You listen for alignment. You stop chasing closure and start creating peace. You don't force conversations that no longer fit. You let silence hold what words can't. And you no longer beg love to stay. If it does, it's welcome. If it leaves, you still remain. Nietzsche didn't promise comfort, he promised truth. And the truth is, you will still feel, still ache sometimes, still long for the softness of being fully seen. But now, you see yourself fully, without editing, without softening, without shrinking into a mold just to be invited in, because you are already in. You are finally home. The people who love you now, they love you. Not the version you crafted for survival, not the character you perfected to earn affection, but the whole you, the quiet, complex, radiant you. And even if they are few, you are no longer lonely, because you're no longer absent from your own life. That's what Nietzsche meant. Not that you must fight the world, but that you must stop fighting yourself. And when you do, you don't need to become someone else. You simply return to who you were before they told you who to be. And in that return, you don't find perfection, you find peace. Gentle, still, enough. You've always been enough. Now, you finally believe it.